the E-code, which means school. Normal basically means a particular kind of school. So in this case, we're talking about pedagogy, right? So the Western National or Association for Normal Schools is basically pedagogy, how they're going to teach these things. But it still comes from a European context. That's kind of the first trend that sort of happens. The second trend, swiftly, which actually happened before 1894, which happened in 1886, but it didn't really blow up until after 94. So you have the Chautauqua movement, which is something that happened in upstate New York. This was really focused on how we're going to teach dance. It's using the awareness of like health, behavior, morality, right, in the practice. So that becomes the focus and what we're doing with dance. We're going to now use dance to teach these ideas, right? These cultural ideas. You then have, you then have a focus, because now the focus is in this school, and which was founded by Andrew G. Anderson, or William G. Anderson, and now we want to take this idea of the school of what we're going to do, and this is the Christian school. But then it further develops where people want to focus on gesture and posture. Right? So just listen to how this is all getting set up. These organizations are coming with it. So now the focus is gesture and posture. You're also getting into physical education. The physical education is when they're focusing on what gesture and posture is. This quickly turns into physical expression. So we have these different ideas of what the dance practice is going to be. Again, there's a European structure to it, because right after that we get more into this sort of revival of nostalgia where people want to clamor back to a time, right, where social dances meant certain things within European practices. And that begins to take shape. Again, people are still here doing whatever dances they're doing, but then there's society that's dictating this is what dance is, this is what is proper, so on and so forth, so this gets around. Now, the last thing that would happen would be the popularity of social dances in America, as well as influence from other cultural practices. So you're getting stuff that's being mixed in from Cuba, you're getting stuff from South America, you're getting stuff from India, and of course you're whatever's coming out of Europe, and whatever dances that are being done of the African aesthetic. All that is starting to blend in some ways, but some people feel like what is happening to European dances are starting to fade a bit. This interest in what these African dances are. And then the influx of migration happening from Europe, those dances are starting to resurge. So then the focus becomes on those. Now, one of the things I want to demonstrate, if I can pull off Michael Jackson with the chord, without the spins, is to think about some of the dance practices that happen, right? We often hear of the cakewalk. That's always the go-to, right? Africans are watching these people do the dance and they imitate it, whatever. That wasn't the only one, right? If you're in a place where you feel like your survival depends on how you assimilate, then that's going to be everything. That's going to be the style of dress, it's going to be the language, it's going to be the movement, that's going to be everything. So, not only seeing Irish jig dances, you're seeing everything. The Scottish coming here around 1700 to 1771 was the strongest. When Scotch were coming and bringing Scottish Highlander dances, you have your English clog, you have your Irish reels and jigs. All of those are happening. A lot of those people from Scotland end up around the Appalachian Mountains, which is why you get flat footing, which is because of the, if you don't know, flat footing was because of the flat boats that they used to run when you're exchanging goods down the Mississippi River. You have two basic boats that people would use, a keel boat, which means it's parked at the bottom, and a flat boat. And the people that danced on top of the flat boat, they just called them flat footing. There are accounts of this dating back to 1805. So the thing that thought that Master Juba invented tap dancing, total BS. It was already out. I can give you his whole rundown. I know Master Juba back to his great-grandparents. Really interesting story. But, back on track. I digress a lot. So, back on track. you think about some of the dances that really took hold in America for a minute, and I'll just touch on a few of them. One, you have the Bohemian polka. I'm familiar with the Bohemian polka? No? So Bohemian polka starts out like this, and tell me if this looks or sounds familiar to anybody. Now, because of the time, I'm going to be skipping some stuff. So, if I'm dancing with my partner, first of all, I have to greet my partner. My partner's standing in front of me. And my partner curtsies, I bow. Y'all know this already. My partner curtsies, I bow. Traditional bow. Okay, boom. First step of what? What's that the first step? Right. Partner bows, I bow, that's the beginning of a swing out. So, Bohemian polka, we come together, we're here, arm in arm. We have, you do this in a circle. 3, and then the 4th one is a swing. Triple step, 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 rock step. Do that 3 times in a circle. On the 4th one, we bring our partner in front of us. That's not too much difference than 3 swing outs on any circle. It just looks a little different. And the timing is different because of these. But these foot patterns are already there. Not just in the Bohemian polka, but in many dances. I don't care where you are in the world, everyone does the same movement. They just have a different social, cultural, aesthetic practice to it. And if I was in a ballet class, and I suck at ballet, but if I was in a ballet class and I did a glissade with an enchappé meaning the jump. But if I did a glissade, and this is without any kind of ballet technique because I suck at that stuff. I like it, just can't do it. But if I were to do it, just imagine that. In hip hop or house, we do the same thing. But instead of a glissade, we do what might be considered related to a grand plie, and you just do this. Different technique. Everybody does the same stuff. It just depends on what social, cultural you come from and what is meaningful in terms of the gestures, in terms of posture, and so on and so forth. So you'll see a lot of similarities. In some cases, you'll see things that directly came from it. Right? Is this making sense so far? Are y'all with me? Okay. I don't want to confuse anybody. It's the skipping part. Now, that dance solidifies a lot of movement, and a lot of the movement survives. Some of it gets changed depending on who is doing it, right? And how they learn it. Because if you grow up in an environment, you don't have to take dance classes. The only reason that people take dance classes, it clearly tells you you did not grow up in that community or in that culture where that dance was happening. It's the only reason. No African child has to grow up and take dance classes to do their cultural practices. They see them all day. No person in Cuba, no person in Puerto Rico, no person nowhere, they grow up doing it. I did not take dance classes when I was growing up. I just watched my parents in the backyard, I watched them out in the park, I watched them in the kitchen, and I just learned, and that's where they showed me. So that was class. I had to go to class to learn Baroque dances. I had to go to class to learn anything that I didn't grow up with. And then that's how I got it. I'm now going to class for Balkan dances. I study as many social practices, I don't care what country it comes from. I just love social dancing. And I often see the connections or search for the connections. So, keeping that in mind, I'm going to jump backwards. Have you heard of the Yankee? And anybody that follows me probably heard me talk about this before. The Yankee. Yankee is a dance from Guinea. So, I'm not going to demonstrate the Yankee, but I will talk about certain steps from the Yankee. And a lot of people from Guinea were taken to where? Or brought where in America? South Carolina? The Carolinas. Right? One of the largest slave ports in America. So, a lot were to cultivate rice because it's very marsh lands and the expertise in cultivating rice was known. So they bring their dance with them. And part of the movement in the Yankee, you can see, some of it survived. because there were dances on the continent that people kind of mixed from different cultures, and then there were dances that they didn't mix. Once they come here, everything is mixing. Not just dances from the African continent, but dances from other cultures that are also here. Everything is starting to blend, right, in some way, shape, or fashion. People are being influenced, which is just a human thing. We're going to be influenced by anybody that's near us, right? So, one of the steps that you will see, and I have the microphone in my hand, so I won't do my arm gestures complete, but one of the steps that you will see in Bianchi looks like this. I can't do the same, but, right, you'll see that. You see what that becomes, right? I don't even have to do it anymore. And you will even see in the Yahweh, people will like twist one foot out and just cord out of that. So you see what that turned into. And it's not called the Charleston because of Charleston per se. It kind of got that name, but it was basically called Charleston. If you don't know this story, because I'll keep this one brief. Reverend Daniel Jenkins, who started orphanage bands to raise money for the orphanage that he started. When they went to New York City, it was people in New York City who referred to it as Charleston, but not necessarily the dance. They were talking about the people. So, know anything about, specifically I say black culture, I don't know if other cultures do this, but in black culture I do know if we don't know your name, we're going to figure out what to call you. So, Malcolm X had red hair, so his nickname was Red. It's just that simple. So when these kids are in New York City, Willie DeLion Smith writes about this in his book, The Music Man. He says that people will look at them and say, hey, Charleston, do that Geechee step you do. So they were called the step, a Geechee step, related to the old Geechee River. But he referred to them as Charleston because he didn't know their name. Then the name stuck for the dance. There was an argument with James Lee Johnson, who thought he came up with it. He didn't. But came up with a song, not the dance. So the dance had been there, but now it gets its name. What it may have been known as before then, I don't know. I haven't come across any material that directly says it was this. It was just a movement that has survived, right? So then we see that. We also see how it has continued, and if you want to say progressed throughout the time, we know it as the Charleston. We know many different variations of the Charleston, the Kansas City Charleston, the Jump Charleston, the Scarecrow. We know all these different variations of the Charleston. But we also know that the Charleston became what in the 1960s? It begins with an M, mashed potato, right? We just go from this sort of almost progressive to a lateral. It's the same movement. It goes from that, and in 1986 it becomes known as what? The Kid Who Played Kick Step, which was originally called the what? The Funky Charleston. That was the original name. They changed the name to the Kid Who Played Kick Step to brand the group. Right? We got to make it about the group now. You still see the Charleston step in a current dance that got popular around 2010, I would say. But still done is a step out of Harlem called Light Feet, with a style performance called Light Feet. And they do a step in there called the Rev Up, which is basically the Charleston. When you hear the young kids describe it, the ones who are aware, they're like, yeah, it's like the Charleston. So when you do the Rev Up, so again, Charleston, Rev Up. Ain't nothing but Charleston, right? So the dance still exists. The Charleston is one of those dances throughout time in America. You keep seeing it, keeps popping up, and go underground and then pops right back up. Because it's part of the corporeal language, which is why we see it. It's something that happens within the community. It's what you see your elders doing, and it continues on. To understand that briefly, I can speak about so that the concept of how these young kids may have saw their elders doing the dance, and then years later they end up doing the dance. Maybe they don't remember, right, that they saw it when they were a kid. It's part of my experience as well. So the thing I want y'all to think about if you're doing research into this stuff is when a person is carrying a child at 4 months old, that's when all the eggs that they'll ever develop happen. Not 4 months old in utero. So when your grandmother was pregnant with your mama, when your mama was 4 months old inside your grandma, all the eggs that she would ever develop happened then, right? The DNA is connected then. So our life, our cellular life began then. Memories and such, I won't go into all the science of it, but memories and all that is connected to this time period, right? It starts to develop. When, after your between 4 weeks and 24 weeks, the auditory system develops and is fully developed by 24 weeks. During this process, you start to pick up ambient sounds and noises and whatever's in your environment. So if you're from a culture or practice or family that often plays music, you're going to pick it up. You might become associated with it with music in a way that someone else does not. Right? That can happen. They have done studies, they being like neuropsychologists and such, have done studies where they gave a pregnant person a piece of music and said, hey, play this the last 2 months of gestation. Play it every day, the last 2 months. After that, don't play it again. After the baby is born, don't play it again. And they would wait a whole year. And they would bring them back, sit them in the room, scientists, speakers, and they would play random bits and pieces of music, and then they would play that same song. And what they noticed was that the baby would always turn to the speaker, jump off his mama's lap and be like, that's my shit. They ain't do that. They might have, I don't know, I wasn't there. But what they noticed was that the baby not only could hear, they remembered. Right? So you think about it, those times when you're like extremely hungry and your stomach is growling, but you're like trying to drink water or breathe or do whatever so no one else hears it. Well, if we can hear what's going on the inside, what's on the inside can hear what's going on the outside. Right? Even through the amniotic fluid, it presents itself as like low muffled tones and frequencies, but you still get accustomed to those rhythms. By age 2, most children have, if I had it up, I'd show it to you. It might be in there, I'll check. But by age 2, children start to show signs of doing whatever the cultural practice is that exists with them. I don't have it up right now, but maybe I can pop it up later. So that's part of that, where there's a memory attached to it where years will go by and that thing will come out. Maybe they hear that rhythm and it reflected to a time period that connects it to the story and the image, and maybe it's just in the body and it comes out a little bit later. But it is part of the common practice of language, nonverbal language that exists. And we keep seeing these dances come up, and the music calls for it, and all of the music is connected to the music that came before it. So you're going to still hear certain frequencies and tones and patterns that comes out. Now, I'm going to jump back again to the adoba. Some people say Adawa. I've heard it from Africans in 2 different ways, but I'm going to say adoba. Do we know what the adoba is?
I just want to hear you spell it.
A-D-O-W-A. Yes. I've never had that question before. So, this dance, there's 2 movements in this dance that show up in jazz. One is this. I'm going to go this way, this chord. Me and this chord won't have it out. So one of the steps in the adoba, I call it the step. They would, in Africa, the dance is the dance. It's in its totality, but Americans have a proclivity to look at it like steps, because we see steps. So one of the movements in the adoba would be this. Right? I'm doing it kind of crude. Another step in the adoba is a more progressive step that's sometimes a bit faster. You can slow down, but one way, for those of you that can see my feet, and if you can't see my feet, imagine. I'll show y'all that. So, one way would be this. Another way would be this. That was really loud. Right? Where one, I'm basically walking heel to toe, kind of quick, knees are bent, orientation to the earth, whatever. The other one, I'm doing the same thing, walking from heel to toe through the arch, but I'm hooking one foot behind the other. Which becomes what? What dance do we know that does that? That walks and hooks a foot behind the other? The camel walk. Now, in the late 1800s, y'all all seen the footage? Excuse me. You've all seen the footage that was shot in Orange, New Jersey, at Thomas Edison's film studio of Joe Rostas, Daniel Televator, and Walter Wilkins. Joe Rostas, the first one that comes out on the diagonal screen. It's only the three of them. The only reason that it's not more than 54 or 56 seconds of tape is because they actually ran out of film. Right when Walter Wilkins went into this tap step, he was about to get busy. It cuts off. But we see Joe Rostas doing a flat-footed, if you will, version of that pushes from the hips. It has a little hop, so you'll see. That was the camel walk at that time. It's still in the ragtime era of the animal dances. That dance gets smoothed out by 1924 when Ma Rainey had our song CC Rider. So now it's a bluesy version and it's just slower. And then you'll get more of this at that time period. Then we see both this movement and this one by the late 30s, mostly in the 40s. We start to see that it's still called the camel walk, right? Moving forward, you can see Al Mims doing it in Spare Moves, where he kind of slides back and he does this coming up. That was basically camel walk because you had the straight version, but then you had this version that people would do. So they kind of went together. It's also connected to snake hips as well. And by 1957, you had Chuck Willis, popular artist at the time, who remade Ma Rainey's song, CC Rider. He did it, but he changed the spelling of it, but it was still CC Rider. And everybody did the camel walk stroll to that song. It's still a blues song, or blues tempo, but now when you do it, you don't just walk and hook, or walk, hook, walk, walk, hook. Now you're doing a drag, which is the stroll. Right? So that's what makes it a stroll when you drag the body. You meet up with your partner, and y'all can walk stroll down the lane. Dick Clark saw this. It was really popular in 1957, but it didn't have a song. So Dick Clark, being who he was, decided, I'm gonna get two writers, and if I remember right, Clyde Otis and Nancy Lee wrote the song The Stroll. He gave it to a group from Toronto called the Diamonds, and they made the song The Stroll. 1958, you will see teenagers in Ohio on the 17th, Idaho, on the 17 show, and they're doing the camel walk stroll. They look absolutely ridiculous, but bless their hearts, they were doing something. So, we still see it being done, right? We continue to see it done in 1969 at the Palace Theater where Sammy Davis Jr. had his show, and he had James Brown on there, and they did the camel walk. As a matter of fact, James Brown mentions to Sammy, you remember that old soulful dance called the camel walk? And he has Sammy do the camel walk, and he does it with that hook step. And then he does his version. So you have that. Then you have the moment where James Brown sort of takes that step, as well as his influence for tap dancing, which he was terrible at. But that's where James Brown's footwork comes from, his influence on tap. One of his favorite artists, tap dancers, was Conrad Buckner, aka Little Buck. Not to be confused with the Jooker from Memphis called Little Buck. But James mixed those with the mashed potato, with the slop. He comes up with the James Brown. So for hip hoppers in 86, 87, you had Super Level C, Castle on the Rug, took James's version, which was, and they did this with a bounce. And they called it doing the James, right? That's still in the motion of some of the stuff that we see with Charleston as well. So we continue moving forward. We can see Michael Jackson, who was inspired by James Brown. He would do the camel walk. Of course, his sister Janet Jackson would see it. 1987, her video Pleasure Principle comes out, she's doing the camel walk. Michael did it all his life. Even now in Oakland, they have a step called the free step, which is the camel walk. I think they recently changed the name to something else, I don't know what it is. But just to show you, like, these dances continue to survive in the community that sort of gave birth to. Now, I'll go back to where I first started. These are aesthetic differences, right? The conversation around preservation is one of human nature. And giving honor and respect to influence, to the aesthetics. There's a Eurocentric aesthetic that, unfortunately, I think in America we have this conversation that around the hierarchy in European structured dances. Everybody thinks all the dances are of a ballet aesthetic, like they're all lifted up in the rib cage. Not all of them. There are European dances that are grounded. We're talking about hierarchy in terms of kings, queens, dukes, duchesses, nobles, and such, right? What they deem to be proper. So to be in those spaces where to move like them. That is what that conversation is. There are Balkan dances that I'm learning that are upright. There are Balkan dances that are more grounded. There are Russian dances that are more grounded. There's so many Polish dances that are grounded. So it's just who sort of took dominance over the conversation, and we think about it in that way. But no. But you have to look at what was the influence as well in terms of preservation, or else we're missing key moments. If you're going to talk about the preservation of tap is Africans taking African sensibility, time, and rhythm, and footwork, mixing that with what they were seeing from Irish jig drills, Scottish Highland dancing, and what little you saw of English folk. Now, when we get to the conversation about Master Juba, as we know, was born in 1825. When they say 1825, he died in 1852. They danced him to death. But he was free because his grandfather, Lucky, his great-grandparents died on the slave ship Sally, coming actually from America to the Caribbean. I forget which island right now, but they died then. And their child, who was only a year old, was born in 1764. He survived. It was the Brown family that issued that the slave ship Sally go to Africa and trade 180 barrels of rum, forget whatever it is, like 17,000 gallons or something. Trade those for 190 Africans. They were to sell some. And the Caribbean is a particular island I can't think of right now. And most of them died, right? They died because there was a moment of insurrection on the ship where they grabbed one of the shipmates at knife point. I don't know how this happened. I wasn't there. But they were telling the captain, turn around and go back, and he just said no. And so people starved to death. Now, the very first day they were on the ship, one person jumped overboard, right? Because it's part of European tradition and African belief that you feel like if you get too far away from the land, the waters won't be able to carry you back to your ancestors. So some people actually went to their death to stay close to their heritage. Long story short, Juba's parents, his dad, Billy, sent Juba off to New York City to live with somebody from the Lowe family who was helping take care of him. If you want to hear the whole story, I can tell you later. But they sent Juba then. At the time, Juba was 4 years old in a saloon hearing all different types of music. Because his grandparent was free, raised free from the Brown family. This is Moses Brown, Joseph Brown, Nicholas, and there's another one I can't think of right now. There was 4 Brown brothers, but only the 2 really were involved with the slave trade. Their whole family their family structure was to sell candles and rum, and they traded horses. But because of what happened on the ship, Moses, who became a Quaker, was like, no, this little one is going to be free. His brother, Nicholas, was like, send that child to Virginia and put him in slavery. But Moses said no. He got the child. He grew up. He had Juba. No, he had his son Billy. Billy had Juba. and Billy ended up killing somebody. This was during war times, and so somebody saw him and said, we're going to kill your son if you don't do this or do that. So that's why Juba went to New York at age 10. And when he got with Pete Lowe, that's who trained him further in dance. He was already interested in dance, but he was only 10. And the only reason his name is Master Juba is not because he was the shit at dancing. His name was Master Juba because when he stepped off of the steamboat to Lexington, Pete ran up to him before he could say anything and said, Master William, your father is eagerly waiting for you. Now to understand that, that's a lie. Why is that a lie? Because Moses, who helped that family get a house in Scrabbletown in Connecticut, he wrote a fictitious letter saying that Juba was the son of Cornelius Vanderbilt, if you know who that is, or was. So they were worried that this young child might be robbed or whatever, because you would have that on trains. That's why they didn't put him on a train, but they put him on a steamboat, but they still wanted him to be safe. So they gave him this letter to give to the captain and said, this is the son of Cornelius Vanderbilt, and his father is going to want to know how he was treated, right? Guaranteeing him safe passage. So when Pete sees him, he runs up to him and is like, Master William, your father's eagerly waiting for you. Master William was just a moniker given to those from wealthy society. Think about Batman, who was known as Master Bruce Wayne, right? Will Smith and the Fresh Prince, Master William from the Butler. So this is all it was of the title. It had nothing to do with his dancing. The dancing came later. And if you're 17 years old and you're dancing, trust me, you have all the vigor and vitality and agility and abilities, your legs is twisted and all kind of things. So I'm not, personally, I'm like, yeah, I would expect that from a 17-year-old. But his ability to do cultural dances that he learned, because again, as a free person, they were able to study their own dance culture, as well as other dance practices that were happening around him. His personal interest was in all of it, because he grew up in a saloon where they played different kinds of music and you saw different kind of dancing. In New York City, he develops and picks it up. So his ability, when we think about him as the progenitor of this, his ability to learn the others, do his thing, and combine it in some kind of way, that's what was really new. But if you're born in 1825, I can produce a lot of articles and books that late 1700s talk about tap, but it wasn't called tap then. It was called tap later. So again, these stories go, and when we talk about preserving, there's a lot that goes into it. And sometimes we don't want to have those conversations. We think, no, it's just this, and no, it's not. Especially in America, where you have so many people who are African descendant, feel like, quote unquote, black folk were always denied because of creation and the innovation and what people brought. That's where that conversation comes from. But okay, I understand that, but we didn't create this stuff on our own. We saw stuff and then we flipped it. And just because you flipped it and it may be situated in this aesthetic more than these aesthetics, you still have to be like, this didn't exist. It wasn't this combination. It wasn't some kind of cross-pollination happening. So when you start talking about black dance, social dance in America, I could be an ass and be like, bless you. I could be an ass and be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Right? All of this stuff is a construct that further separates, in my opinion, that further separates us from a grander understanding. Right? We unfortunately cling to ideas that we have been taught that are not accurate. And that's a problem. To me, that's a problem. Right? And it stops us from seeing, and it's not about being in a utopian space, but it stops us, or can stop us, from seeing something greater of the human experience, right? I know that we have systems in place and laws and all these things that forbid people from doing this and doing that and having access. I understand that, which is the problem. Because the last time I checked, there's only one race, and that is human. People are like, I'm mixed race. Unless you're mixed with an alien, you're not mixed race. Because your mom and dad is still human. Last time I checked. I don't know what that means. But we've been taught this. We know that race is a construct, but we still cling to it. Because if you don't know where to put your hat on the thing that you believe in, you're like, I don't know what's going on. When I walk in the room and I tell you, that's nice dancing, but that ain't jazz dancing. Well, I've been doing this for 60 years. I don't know what to tell you. That's not what you think you're doing. It just is what it is. The truth is true. It's much more interesting than a lie. But we cling to these labels. We cling to labels that we know are constructed. No one on this planet referred to themselves as black and white before the late 1600s. You were from whatever religious practice you believe or from whatever country you were from. That's how you identify. But because of basically rich folk in America not wanting the uprising from the poor, split, conquered, and divide. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but unless you want me to later. But these things stop us from seeing, so then it becomes, well, that dance is ours. That dance is whoever's contributed to it. I don't know. I don't claim it's mine. I used to. I don't claim it's mine. It's not. I used to be upset with hip-hop. Why don't y'all learn how to do your own culture dances? What the hell is that? In America. Right? I don't even know what America is. I don't know what that is. It's a concept, it's an idea, but these things are problematic when we look at certain stuff, especially when we start talking about dance and preservation. Right? You guys have to understand human nature, and this was contributed, this was contributed, this was contributed. This might have more, so there's a deeper conversation of like, well, it's situated more than that. But as I said before, without European social dances, there is no India. It would not exist because that is still the structure, but it's done with an Africanist aesthetic. Case in point, you know what's really popular right now? Boots on the ground. And if anybody knows how to do a line dance, let me tell you something. To my knowledge, and I could be wrong, I don't think so, but I could be. To my knowledge, the construction of a line dance in America is not done on the continent of Africa. You know what was done in America? The Virginia reel. There's a few other ones, but the Virginia reel has the most important because that was the one that everybody learned and flipped to the next step, which is what is part of the structure of line dances today. If I had time to demonstrate, I'd teach y'all the Virginia reel and break the whole damn thing down, how it connects. You don't have that kind of time. But even when you see it, even when you see making a similarity connection to what is this if I'm doing a Big Apple? Right? What's that called? Say it loud. Bridge. It's a London Bridge. You know what they do in the Virginia reel? This. Once the partners get to the very end of their pass, they do this and everybody goes under to step the next line. They also do this in Swedish traditional dances. You know what everybody calls a Texas Tommy? It's not a Texas Tommy. I'm a teacher Texas Tommy here with Chester, one of my mentors. I thought I saw him come in. But we're gonna collectively go through the Texas Tommy. Now, what people see is the behind the back turn has somehow been known as the Texas Tommy. Like, dang, that's a behind the back turn. The Texas Tommy has a whole bunch of steps that are situated intact. When you understand the foundation of the Texas Tommy, you have to understand basic tap. And then that structure there, but then it pulls from other stuff. So there's a lot of uncovering we need to look at to understand the relationships of these dances. Okay, I went way over. I'm going to calm it down now. I know I was supposed to talk about American social dances, but to talk about that, I want y'all to understand the relatability between a lot of dances. Black social dances are based in the retentions of Africanist aesthetics that have not only African movement-based practices, but also have influences from other cultural practices blended in. And that's, in the very simplest way, is what we're looking at. And that aesthetic took hold. Again, we have to talk about multiple people coming together. You know, if you want to talk about Scott Joplin, you have to talk about Philip Sosa and the mix of march time music and the ragtime music. You're talking about a mix. If you're going to talk about gospel music, you're going to have to talk about books on quality that Africans learned from Europe. It was one of the books that they were able to read, and especially in New Orleans. So you look at hymns having words placed on them that have to deal with agrarian practices at the time, which becomes known as songs in the Bible, and then not in this order, but Negro spirituals and sometimes songs in the South, and eventually we get to gospel. But in America, it has been a collection of things coming together. Some more than others, but it's been a collection of things coming together, right? Except for the indigenous, everybody else came here. And they dominated and brought their stuff here. Even when you were placed in bondage, Africans placed in bondage, their aesthetic still dominated. The language still dominated. The words we use today, like dig, is an African word from Bantu-speaking people. Jam is an African word. Jamboree is an African word. In the movement, in the music, it's still dominated, but it's still blended with other practices. And that has to be continuously researched. I'm going to shut up now. I hope I gave y'all some stuff to take away. It was a hodgepodge. But yeah, I'm going to stop right there. Good. There is really no time for any kind of questions. And you need some rest. Dancing your heart out, that's good. But if there is one, I'll try. I may or may not have an answer. If I don't, I'll try to guide you to the person or a place that will give you an answer. Once, twice, we're done. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and events, and week.